Welcome back to How It's Restored. I'm David Cooper. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the provenance of the 1938 Peugeot 402 Dalmah competition roadster that was first raced by Dorothy Patten and her husband Rainer Dorndorf. So really the question is, what does provenance of a car like this add to the car, to its value, to its understanding, to its history? Why do we care? And I think we care for a very important reason. I mean, from a simple economic standpoint, a very important provenance, or somebody gets fascinated with somebody like Dorothy Patten and her husband and the story of this car, makes the car much more interesting than the average car that has no history. But you know, it adds to the value, and I've been told by one of the big auction owner of one of the big auction companies that he thought provenance would add, you know, depending on the provenance, somewhere between 40 and 60, 80, 100% to the value, depending on who owned the car. Obviously, if it's Steve McQueen, it's one story. You know, if it's Dorothy Patten, it's another. You know, I have judged at concours around the world, and I've been judging in cars of this class. Pre-war European cars are generally what I'm judging, and I know the judging process, and I know concours, and I know how they work, and I know how people look at these cars. And so, you know, I look at it, you know, if I were to look at it as a judge as opposed to the restorer, I would look at it and say I'm extremely impressed, number one, with somebody who went to the trouble of trying to find the original paint type and the original leather type and the original chrome type and all the details that were done on this car that are authentic. And we would look at those, and those things are all like in your mind as you're judging a car like this. And I look at it and I'd say, wow, numbers matching, beautiful car, exceptional history, restored with such care and detail. That's pretty amazing. And this car is pretty special. I mean, George Patten, who designed the car, is a very brilliant designer. It's a beautiful car, it's beautiful design. So, I mean, it would do well in a concours, but would it win? It depends on what it's up against. You know, we have a rule in concours judging, you don't judge the owner, you judge the car. And judging the car by itself, it's a pretty extraordinary car. And while a number of Dalmahs survive and have been done, very few of them have been done with this much attention to originality. When the judges come to look at the car in typical concours, the first thing they look for is that everything functions. So you have to show them all the lights work, the horn works, the engine starts, and things run properly, and everything is working. The clock is working, the gauges work, etc. Once you test everything and make sure it works, you want to make sure nothing's leaking. If you got leaks all over the car, oil leaks or drips or underneath the car or whatever, that counts against you. In fact, it's more authentic if the car leaks, because these cars never didn't leak. But this is something people are looking for in concours today. You're looking for fit and finish of the parts. You're looking for the doors, how they shut, and how the interior looks, and whether the materials are right. And then you start to say, did they do the right thing with the original materials, or did they use the right finishes, or did they use Phillips head screws that weren't available in 1938? You know, I mean, these are the kinds of things you're looking for. Something that's going to be glaringly wrong and bother you later, you know. And if you talk to somebody and you're asking him questions and he says, well, you know, we went to the trouble of trying to use nitrocellulose paint and hexavalent chrome, judges will look at that and go, wow, you know, you're really trying to go the extra level and step. You know, we went to the trouble of trying to dye the leather using a technique from the 30s and using cellulosic dyes for the surface, because that's what was authentic at the time. This is sort of going the extra mile. A lot of judges don't know that stuff, so they're depending on the owner to help educate them, you know. I mean, if you have the wrong engine in the car, that costs you. The fact that I now have a numbers matching engine and I can prove it, that's a big advantage. You know, when I was 5 numbers off, that was not as good. Close. Maybe they don't deduct it, maybe they do. But the fact that you have it, that pushes you into a different category. The fact that you have the right wheels, you know, that's very special. If you chrome plated the wheels, that's a ding, because they didn't chrome plate those wheels, they painted them black. Okay, you know, this is the kind of thing you have to watch for. If you have a provenance of somebody like Dorothy Patten and you pull out the picture of her standing in front of the car and you say, look, we found these badges, we found the tax badge, we made this all work exactly the way she wanted, that counts even more. And you explain, they'll say, well, why did you restore it to that point and not to its initial point? You have to make a case for that. Well, let's put it, the goal on this restoration was to be as authentic as possible, which happens to be, today, something you win best in class in. But I mean, when I started in the restoration business, people were getting awards for the shiniest paint. They weren't getting awards for accuracy. Accuracy is something new in the concour world. Authentic historical accuracy is something they have moved toward. I was always there, they've moved toward me in a funny way. Dorothy Patten was born in poverty. She was born to a very poor family in Wales, right on the edge of Britain. And her father worked for a steel company, but he was so impoverished at the time, 1906, that she was put into a young home. She and a sister of hers were put into a home for young girls because they couldn't afford to raise them. And she was being trained as a domestic servant. That's what these girls were being trained as. And about the time she was in her late teens or 20s, she had somehow managed to do something else with her life entirely. But she managed to meet somebody who was able to help her train her innate abilities to drive and be a very skilled driver, and to the point where she was, by 1933, driving in the Alpine Rally, which is one of the hardest events in the entire world for racing. And she drove in the 33 and 34 Rally, driving in an Alvis. The Alvis was owned by a wealthy benefactor of hers. And she drove that car. Then she had another car that she drove in a couple other races that she was loaned. And then she ended up buying a Samson, a British race car. It was sort of a stodgy looking race car, as race cars go. It wasn't stylish like the Darma, but she raced that very effectively and participated in lots and lots of different races. As she was racing in Monte Carlo in the 1935, I believe, she met Rainer Dorndorf. And Dorndorf was a refugee from Nazi Germany. His family was the largest shoe manufacturer. They were from Breslau in the east of Germany, and they were the largest shoe manufacturer in Germany. But being a Jewish-owned company, when the Nazis came to power, they were forced out, and Rainer himself, a young heir to this fortune, was pretty much forced out of Germany because he was outspoken about being anti-Nazi. He was a big car enthusiast, and so he went to a race in Monte Carlo and met this party girl who was a lot of fun, and that was Dorothy Patten, and 6 months later they got married. And they raced the Samson, and then after a while they decided the Samson wasn't the right car for them, so they went out and ordered this car, the Peugeot Dalma, which they raced together in they had it delivered to them in the spring of 1939. War broke out in September, and in that 6-month period, they managed to race in 9 important races in Europe and England. So very impressive history. They were apart for quite a while. The car was put away through the war. Don't know the whole details of everything she did during the war, but in any event, they ended up getting divorced at that point, about 1943, mid-war, and she went off to have eventually to meet a military person from the Air Force and get married after the war. But he went on to stay in Ireland, and after the war he was released, stayed in Ireland, made a life for himself there, became a gentleman farmer, became successful, remarried, had a second family. And one of his daughters of the second family is one of the people who helped me with all this history that I just told you. And I got to meet her. We got to piece together a lot of things. She put together information she had compiled with information that I had compiled about Dorothy Patten and the car. Her father never would talk about Dorothy Patten or the Dharma, with the family, so she had asked him questions about it and he would always refuse to talk about it. But he, after the war, raced a BMW 328 in Ireland and had a number of friends in the racing world. I definitely think Dorothy Patten was an interesting person. She was a very talented driver. Her history makes this car far more interesting. Her choices about it make it more interesting. And that's part of what makes these cars special. I mean, it's not just that it's a special car, which it is, but there are a handful of Dalmats that were used with different features. That's not what's special about this particular car. What makes this car special is it was her car. She chose the colors, she chose the way it was raced. They have a race history. It's all been documented. Very few cars have a documented history like this, and to have somebody like her, who was actually the lead owner of this car and the person who really made it hers and drove it successfully in races and did quite well with it. That was a really extraordinary achievement. Dorothy Patten became a world-class driver. From 1933 till 1939, she was considered one of the very, very good drivers in the world, male or female. She wasn't at the top level, but she certainly was a mid-level driver. And you know, that already meant you had to know your cars very well. In those days, you couldn't just get into a car and drive with a whole team behind you and say, you know, give us some feedback about what you think of this or that. You know, she was involved in every aspect of the car, and she had to be. I mean, if you're out on a rally with no ability to get support, you have to deal with the car. Whatever comes up, you have to deal with yourself, or you're not going to finish. Thanks for watching this presentation on the restoration of the 1938 Peugeot 402 Dalmat Competition Roadster. This was a really involved process. I wanted to explain it in detail. I appreciate your patience with it, and I hope that you understand something about what we go through to restore some of these very important, significant cars of the 20th century.